Hello, everybody. I'm Maxime Bernier. I'm in Ottawa right now with one of my guests. I'm very, very pleased that he's with us, Brian Peckford. Brian is the only fathers of our Charter of Rights that is still alive, still with us. And we must know what happened in 1992 when we decided in Canada to have a Charter of Rights. And Brian was one of the premier. He was at that time Premier of Newfoundland and part of the negotiation. And I think it's important for our viewers, for Canadians, to know a little bit about that part of our history here in Canada. Brian, thank you for being with us. I really appreciate that. You've been fighting for freedoms and for our country for a long time.
Thank you, Mr. Bernier, for having me. I should say thank you to my leader for having me, because I'm a member of your party and a strong supporter of you and the principles that your party stands for. And yes, I was a part of that very historic time in 1991 and 92. And I think what your supporters and the viewers would be very interested in is the question that you just asked about a little bit of the history of that time. I think it's not well known that these negotiations went on for 17 months that led to the Constitution Act of 82, in which the Charter of Rights and Freedoms is located. Okay, the Charter is in the Constitution Act of 1982, and it was 17 years. And it was Justin Trudeau's father, who was Prime Minister at the time. And why it took really 17 months was we had a lot to talk about, and putting together the Charter, as well as other matters that dealing with Indigenous people, dealing with equalization, dealing with natural resources. So there was minority language rights were all part of that big act. But the main part of the act was that Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Well, halfway through those negotiations, Justin's father up and left the table and said, I cannot negotiate with you people. You're too difficult. And he took his marbles and went home and went to the House of Commons and passed an act to unilaterally bring the Constitution home from London, patriation, and put in his own Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And we challenged him.
So without any more consultations?
Without any more consultation, he said, I can do this on my own. And so he passed an act in the House of Commons, had it ratified in the Senate, became the law of Canada, and he was going to go to London and have all of this done on his own, just the federal government. We took him to court in 3 provinces of Canada, in Newfoundland, in Quebec, and in Manitoba. And of course, that put the pressure on them. We said, you cannot do this alone. This is a federation. This is not a unitary state. It's made up of provinces and the federal government. And so we took him to court. That ended up in the Supreme Court of Canada in September 1981, where Mr. Trudeau lost. His own friends on the Supreme Court of Canada said, you cannot do this. You need to have a majority of provinces with you to do this, to pass a new Charter of Rights and Freedoms, to patriate the Constitution, to have the Constitution Act of 1982. You can't do it alone. So today, I am very, very angry when I see a Charter of Rights and Freedoms with only one signature on it. Because Mr. Trudeau's Charter of Rights was defeated by the Supreme Court of Canada. The Charter of Rights that was passed was the Charter of Rights of 9 premiers and the Prime Minister of Canada. So there should be 10 signatures on any Charter of Rights in order for it to be constitutional. So we went back to the table after the Prime Minister lost. He came back to the table with his tail between his legs, although knowing a Trudeau, they don't have a tail between their legs very long. They're quite the aggressive, arrogant people, and they believe that their way is the right way, and everybody else's way is not very correct. But back to the table he came, and out of that we negotiated what is now the Constitution Act of 1982, okay?
With a Charter of Rights.
With a Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And how did we get it? 3 days in November 1981. November 3rd, 4th, and 5th. No deal on the 3rd. No deal all through the day of the 4th. The night of the 4th, my delegation and I did a 2-page compromise proposal. took it to the Chateau Laurier Hotel, to the Saskatchewan suite, and asked representatives of British Columbia, Alberta, and Saskatchewan, what do you think of this, based upon where we came in the last 2 days? Does this have a chance to fly? They looked at it and they said, you know what? We think it does. We think you might have just hit upon those areas where the provinces can move a little bit, the federal government can move a little bit, and we can have a deal. So we brought in Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island and Manitoba. And you might have heard in reading our history that this was supposed to be the night of the long knives, where we were stabbing Quebec in the back because they weren't at that suite that night. Well, guess what happened?
Quebec was in Hull.
Exactly. We knocked on their door, no answer. We've called their numbers, no answer. Where were they? They were all over partying at a restaurant in Hull. So that's why they weren't there. There was no night of the long knives. So all that history that's been written is completely mythical and untrue. However, through that night when we finalized that deal, through that night, we had agreed that we would all meet the next morning for breakfast. Now, that breakfast was already scheduled because when Mr. Trudeau left the table, the provinces broke into two factions. 8 were against what the Trudeau was doing. 2 stayed with Mr. Trudeau, New Brunswick and Ontario. So it was a group of 8. So when we went to the conference on the 3rd and 4th and 5th, we were meeting every morning at 8 o'clock before.
And at that time, René Lévesque, did he know that you had a deal? Or
well, that night, he was called when he got back, and we said, we will have the deal for you tomorrow morning before we meet the group of 8. You'll see it. We'll give it to your officials, and you can read over and see what you think of it before we formally meet as a group of 8 and see what you think of it. So he was at that meeting that morning of the 5th of November with his delegation, and Peter Lougheed actually, when René Lévesque came in the room, said, René, here it is. Remember I called you this morning. Here's the, and he called it at that time the Peckford recommendation. That's what Lougheed himself called it, because it was based on the Newfoundland proposal that we had gotten this final deal. And so we gave them time to take a look at it, and then we all debated it together.
Without Trudeau in the room. Without Trudeau in the room.
Without Trudeau in the room. That's right. Before we went to the main meeting, Trudeau wasn't in the room, just a group of 8. So all of them looked at it, including René, and René said, I think, by the way, if left to his own devices, René would have approved it. I think, this is me, and I have good reason to say this, which I can't release, I have never released, but I know that Mr. Morin and Mr. Parizeau, who were part of his delegation, were very strong Quebec nationalists, as you know better than I.
Hardcore independentists,
Exactly. The hardcore independents. And they were his advisors at the time. I knew Mr. Lévesque well before, that. I knew him from the time I was Minister of Energy in Newfoundland, I dealt with him before. So I knew René Lévesque really, really well. I think if left to his own devices, he would have went along with it. But he wasn't alone. And so these people were powerful, powerful voices in the party and in the government. And so they said no. Everybody else in the room, the other 7, said, unamended, go with it, like you did it last night, like you got it before us now. We don't want to amend a thing. And we'll present it to all 11 governments at a scheduled final meeting later that day. And you, Mr. Peckford, will present it because you started this last night.
That was your proposal.
Exactly. And so we adjourned the meeting, went to the full meeting with Trudeau, all the federal people, and the Ontario, Manitoba, New Brunswick, and everybody there. And Mr. Trudeau spoke up after the meeting got going and said, and here was his words, I understand, Mr. Peckford, you have a proposal to present. Because before the meeting started, we had our people go up to his people and say, Mr. Peckford has a proposal to present on behalf of the 8.
So Trudeau changed the agenda to be sure that you'll be able to present it.
Exactly. And so he asked me to present it. I presented it, and all of this is in my book, all these different proposals in the book that I wrote, which demonstrates, we're going from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, boom, with a few changes, not a lot, a few changes in equalization, a few changes in the wording on Aboriginal, no changes in the charter. The charter that we presented that day is the charter you have today as part of the law and constitution of Canada.
With the clause 1?
With section 1.
Section 1? Okay.
Yes.
Because
yes.
you're going to speak about section
Yeah.
1. I want to know a little bit more details about that section.
And I'm very eager to provide them. So
Okay,
that's the
so go ahead.
history
Yeah.
for your viewers as how the Constitution Act of 82 happened and how the Charter of Rights came to be.
I think it's very important to know that, we have that. It's not the Trudeau's Charter of Rights.
Exactly.
It's Canada Charter of Rights.
You got it.
And with all the provinces. So,
Absolutely.
and, I'm very honored to have you and having this opportunity to have that discussion with you today. And but can you go on with the charter
Yes.
and the details in the charter?
Yes.
Because, we are actually in the middle of a
Yes.
COVID hysteria and
Right.
we are losing our rights and freedoms all
Right.
across the country.
Okay.
You are in Ottawa today because of that convoy
Exactly.
and that we support the Truckers Freedom Convoy.
Okay.
And people are fed up and are mad about the situation in Canada.
Right.
And we are supposed to have a Charter of Rights, but our politicians are not respecting our Constitution and
Right.
our Charter of Rights.
Right.
I had a lot of questions the last 2 years.
Yes.
Maxime, we must change our Charter of Rights or change our Constitution because, we don't have any rights anymore. And my answer was always the same. You don't need to change. We have a great Constitution, a great Charter of Rights. You need to change the politicians.
Exactly.
The problem is the politician.
And that's why I'm a member of your party. That's why I support you today. For what you just said is what I've been saying now for the last year and a half. You said it long before me, but that's exactly right what you just said. Now, so I make 4 points for you to help on that. Charter of Rights and Freedoms, okay? First principle is this, that every Canadian must know that Section 52 of the Constitution Act says the following. The supreme law of Canada is the Constitution. So every Canadian must know that the Charter of Rights and Freedoms is the supreme law of Canada as it affects individual rights and freedoms. It is the supreme law. Every bylaw in every municipal council, every law in every provincial legislature, every law in the federal parliament is subservient to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It stands on high above all others, okay? The supreme law of Canada is the Constitution, is the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Number 2, I want to say, is that the first words in our Charter is not Section 1. It is, whereas this country is founded on the principles of the supremacy of God and the rule of law. And after that sentence, there is a colon, a grammatical colon, not a period. It's a colon, which means everything comes after this. In other words, the Charter is to be interpreted under 2 principles, supremacy of God and the rule of law. And that's been ignored by a lot of courts today, and we must bring them back to what is in the... I'm not talking about what should be in the Constitution. I'm talking about what is in the Constitution. These are words that they're supposed to read and interpret, right, when they're interpreting law under the Constitution and under the Charter. Okay, that's 2 points. Now, 3 points. Two more points. Here are the main parts of the Charter which apply to you and me and to individuals all across Canada. Okay. Section 2, which is freedoms. The freedom of conscience, the freedom of religion, the freedom of expression, the freedom of thought,
freedom to travel,
freedom of the press, okay, in Section 2. Also in Section 2 is the freedom to assemble, like you were doing in Manitoba.
Yeah,
right? Freedom to associate, as you were doing in Manitoba, as a citizen of Canada when they arrested you. Section 6 says the freedom to travel anywhere in Canada or leave Canada. Like you and I now can't travel as part of your work as a leader of a political party. You can't go everywhere in Canada because you're denied the same rights as other Canadians because you've chosen a certain course of medical ethics, and now you're stopped from doing that. That's violating that Section 6. Then there's Section 7, which is every Canadian has the right to life, liberty, and the security of the person. Life and liberty are glorious, right?
Yeah.
Sacred words, right? In any constitution. But we'll emphasize security of the person now for obvious reasons. Security of the person, like I said in my speeches in the last few days, means you cannot touch my body unless I agree. Autonomy of the individual, security of the person. So all of these coercion efforts by the government to try to get people to get injections violates that section of the Charter, security of the person. And finally is Section 15, which is every Canadian has the right to equality before the law. You and I are supposed to be equal before the law. In other words, we're supposed to be able to go anywhere in Canada, do anything we want, just like everybody else. Right now, we're not being able to do that, and therefore Section 15 is being violated.
Vaccinated or not. Yeah.
Exactly. Now, we come to the bothersome part that Canadians have. And this is what I really want to clarify. I was there. I know. I have a good memory. And I know. And Section 1, we had to put that in because we're putting this in the Constitution, not a federal act, not a provincial act. This is in the Constitution of the country. Might be
the Supreme Law of the land.
The Supreme Law, and might not be changed for generations. So over those many generations, there could be an insurrection, there could be a war, could be peril to Canada, right? So governments must be willing to act quickly if it's in a very, very serious situation. So what we meant when we put in Section 1, that it could only apply in a very unusual circumstance, like the peril of the state. The state existence was in peril, war or insurrection. I remember when we debated it. I remember when we talked about it.
So what is the wording of Section 1?
Section 1 says that the governments have the right to override all of the rights I just talked about and the freedoms I just talked about.
In a free and
But I'll come to that. So, number one, my argument is that Section 1 doesn't even apply in this circumstance because the virus, 99% survival rate, less than 1% fatality rate. That's not a threat to the state. Therefore, Section 1 doesn't apply. Okay? So, fundamentally, Section 1 doesn't apply. But I'm a fair man. I'm a fair guy. Okay. Let's say it does apply. Okay. You have 4 tests to meet, even if it does apply, in war, insurrection, or peril to the state. And those 4 tests are, you have to demonstrably justify. And I remember us debating, why are we we got justify in there. Why put in demonstrable? Because we want to be ensure that the government's got to go out of their way to prove that they can override these rights and freedoms. They're so precious. So we put in demonstrably justified. Now, in anybody's reasonable interpretation of demonstrably justified, you have to demonstrably justify that the benefits outweigh the costs. What government has done a cost-benefit analysis of their measures? Not one in Canada, not one. So they don't meet test number 1, absolutely, even if it did apply. Then by law, well, that means a new law. Where's the new law? They're operating under existing laws. No new law, no parliaments involved. Okay? And then it has to be done reasonable limits. But the limits keep changing. Every month or every few weeks, another public health officer is out with another new, goalposts.
They told us 75% of the population will have the vaccine. Exactly. That will be the end of everything. And after that, 80% enough.
So where's the reasonable limits? So they don't meet the test of reasonable limits. And the last one is the real copper fastener one for you and me and people who are advocating freedoms, okay? Because it's this. Those 3 must be done in the context of a free and democratic society. Now, what does a free and democratic society mean? It means, we better get our parliaments involved. We have 14 parliaments in this country, and all of them are closed most of the time that this pandemic was on. Was there any parliamentary committee formed? Right? Did the people's representatives have any say over any of this? Of course not. And so therefore, those 4 tests were not even met, even if Section 1 did apply. That's why the Charter is still valid today, why you and I are up talking to Canadians to say, you still have Charter rights because they did not meet the conditions of Section 1, even if it does apply.
So what you're saying, every draconian measure that they imposed to us the last 2 years were illegal and unconstitutional.
Absolutely. Totally. And that's where we have to stand, right? This is the first big test of our Constitution. Right? We had the BNA Act when? 1867.
Yeah.
When was the next Constitution Act? 1982.
Yeah.
Right? 114 years later. Right?
Yeah.
Well, big stuff.
Yeah.
And you mean to tell me 40 years after that, we're suddenly going to kneel down and say that all of these principles and sacred values of our country are going to go down the drain because somebody in their own mind determined that it was an emergency? They never went through the proper parliamentary procedures, never went through the proper tests, right, of demonstrably justified. No. You're not going to take those charter rights. Remember, the Americans formed their country in 1776. In 1791, they had a Bill of Rights.
Yeah.
Our country was formed in 1867. We never had a written Bill of Rights until 1982. Yeah. And somebody's going to tell me as a Canadian now, you're going to steal my individual rights and freedoms away over something that you've concocted on dubious science? No. We must fight this, and we must win this so that the Charter is still alive and well, and we have a democracy in this country.
So I always said that there's two battles in what is happening right now. The battle to change the public opinion.
Yes.
And as a politician, that's what I'm trying to do. And if we have more people on our side, that will put pressure on these authoritarian governments.
Yes.
And there's the battle in the court.
Yes.
So, and that's an important one.
Yes.
And I know that you have a case with the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms because you cannot travel across the country by plane like me, and you are suing the federal government for that. It's against your charter, your rights to travel across the country freely. Right. How do you see the result of all, and there's other cases all across the country in from court now. So how do you see the result of all these cases?
Okay.
Do you think we're going to win that only at the Supreme Court, or how do you?
Okay. As of this morning, after doing my speech yesterday and my speeches for the last year and a half, and looking at things this moment, I think there are two big things at play to answer your question. One is the truckers' convoy. I'll tell you why. Today, courts are they're less looking at the Constitution than they are what the people are saying. Sadly, because they should be looking at what the Constitution says. Yeah. We know from a couple of court cases now, what I just said is true. They have nowhere in those decisions, there are lower courts, thankfully, did they mention supremacy of God, the rule of law, right? Then nowhere did they mention other science, only the government science, okay? And so they've erred in law, but they're getting away with it up to now. So I think we have two fronts here. The courts, the courts of appeal of the provinces and the Supreme Court of Canada. But I think what is really important now is for the people of Canada to realize that through the convoy and legitimate civil disobedience, we can influence the opinion that the judges are going to have at the end of the day. So what is becoming more and more important as I speak right now, I'm getting goosebumps right now from what I'm saying, because I now realize that what is happening in Canada right now with people and with the truckers in particular are crucial to us changing public opinion, and especially the opinion of the leaders all the way up into the judiciary to see to it that this charter is honored. So my anticipation is that as we move forward with these appeals beyond the lower courts of the provinces into the provinces' courts of appeal, which will end up in the Supreme Court of Canada, that process over the next half year to a year, forgetting the mandates coming off, forgetting that doesn't mean a thing. It helps people at a certain level, but it doesn't change our democracy. Our democracy is still gone. Our democracy is still gone until we get a reaffirmation by the courts that the charter applies and has been violated. Okay? And so the two forces that are very important right now for that to happen is the people,
the public opinion
through these convoys and other people getting out on the streets in civil disobedience, which is a right that every Canadian has. Every person, right, has a right to get out and protest and express their opinion. So the more we can legitimately protest, I think the greater the influence we'll have, both on the political leaders, but more particularly upon the judiciary, so that they see that the body politic of this country favors reaffirmation of everything that's in that charter, and that this cannot happen again.
And we'll have that decision, and that decision will be a precedent that the future governments won't be able to do what they did to us in the future.
Excellent, because if we don't do that, the precedent will be that governments can do what they bloody well like in the future.
Yeah.
And our democracy is gone. There is an organization in the world called Democracy Watch, and they assess the level of democracy in countries around the world. Right now, Canada has an assessment of free. If we don't reaffirm our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, that will change to partly free. And then very much later to not free at all. This is the pivotal time in our history to reestablish that we're a constitutional parliamentary democracy.
With real constitutional
With
rights.
real constitutional rights and freedoms, exactly.
So these two battles are going together, changing the public opinion and the court in the courts.
Absolutely.
So I believe that we must thank the truckers for what they're doing right now. They are able to, yes, it's a kind of civil disobedience.
Absolutely.
But peacefully.
Yes.
And we know that the public opinion is moving right now.
Yes.
In early January, we had about only 10-15% of the population that were saying to these governments, enough is enough. And now it's about 40-50% of the population. So thanks to that movement, and to you also, because you are explaining that to Canadians, that we have rights and we must fight for that. Exactly. We cannot take our rights for granted
anymore.
And and you know that you were there, because I must admit that I did some interviews, and when I was saying, it's unconstitutional, we must fight that. And the first question, Mr. Bernier, there's the Section 1 in the Constitution.
Right.
The government has the right to do that. It's an emergency.
Right.
So, and Mr. Bernier, the lower courts were in agreement with the situation right now. Right. So when you're saying it's unconstitutional, you're not right, Mr. Bernier.
Exactly.
But you were there. You were part of that negotiation. You signed that Charter of Rights. And you know that Section 1 that you explained to us, it does not apply.
Does not apply. And even if it does, they never met the test. So in either count, they lost. Okay?
Yeah.
And so that the Charter still applies. That's extremely important for people to understand. That, right? And the other thing I say is, in the good Canadian tradition, we're in the last part of the second period. The hockey game is not over because none of the appeal courts have ruled yet, nor the Supreme Court of Canada. So we've got a whole period, right? We're about in the 15 minute of the second period. Okay? 5 minutes left there, and then we've got the whole third period to go. And now we have a chance, you and me, and Canadians have a chance to influence that third period. So that at the end of that third period, the Supreme Court of Canada says what they said in 1991, right? Trudeau, you're unconstitutional. And now they'll say, Trudeau Jr., you're unconstitutional too.
Shame on you.
Same one, in different clothes. Okay? So we have an unbelievable obligation between now and when the Supreme Court of Canada rules to influence, to reestablish our democracy, get that Charter of Rights, so that becomes the precedent. The Charter becomes the precedent, so no government could ever touch it again.
Yeah, absolutely. And that movement and pressure that people are saying to these governments, it's not only in Ottawa, it's all across the country.
Precisely.
And we know that we can unite everybody under that freedom umbrella.
Right.
And people are coming. It's not a question of being vaccinated or not right now. It's not a question about fighting a virus anymore. It's a question of, do you want to live in a society where your rights won't be respected? Do you want to live in a society where the government will decide what you can do with your life or not? And I think people understand that now. Right. we funded that party on 4 principles: individual freedom, personal responsibility, respect, and fairness. And when I was speaking about freedom 2 years ago, what do you mean, Maxime? What do you mean? And now more people understand that that fight is so important, not only for us, but for the future of this country, for our children, our grandchildren. Absolutely. And I want to thank you for what you did. You were there, and I'm pretty sure that our viewers are very happy with that part of history that they know now because of you. And that second period, you're going to play in that second period. You are our star player. So you are with us, and we're going to win that. Actually,
my best period is my third period.
I know that. And we won't have to go to overtime.
We will not have to go to overtime. There's no shootout here. We'll finish it off at the end of the third period.
We'll do that together.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. I
Thank
really
you,
appreciate our discussion.
I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Follow us, MaximeBernier.com, the People's Party of Canada.ca, and also Maxime Bernier on Twitter. Brian also, you can follow him. And you said about your book. Where do you know where they can?
They can get it at Amazon.
Amazon.
Okay, just put in Brian Peckford and up will come my book. Someday the sun will shine and have not will be no more. They can get my book and they can go to my blog, which is Peckford42. I was born in 1942. The number's 42, Peckford42.wordpress.com. I get 10 to 20,000 a day going to my blog.
I just want to let you know that TBOF, Taking Back Our Freedoms. That's an organization. Brian is the chairman of that organization, and I'm very pleased to be on the board. That's something that you started, when did you start it?
Only a few months ago with some people out of Alberta, and then it started to grow, and they started to get board members like you, and doctors like Dr. Bridle, right, who became part of the board, Dr. Paul Alexander became part of the board. Dr. Roger Hodgkinson became part of the board. And so we have a very diverse board of scientists, of politicians and former politicians like us, and other ordinary citizens. And they're doing what we just talked about, taking back our freedoms. And
if they want to know more, you have a website?
The website is tbof.ca.
Okay.
And anybody can go there and donate to it and to look more carefully at what we stand for.
And what we are asking you to go and see your representative at the municipal, at the federal, at the provincial level, and just, call that person, write to that person, email to that person, and tell them that enough is enough. Thank you.
tbof.ca.
Thank you.